everyone, it's Catherine here from Inky Fingered Cat. A few weeks have passed since I've got out my magazine kit and I thought, right, let's make something. I ummed and ahed for a little bit, but I decided on using the embossing folder. Now, I will say it's quite, it's not a very deep embossing folder. And also, I use some really cheap cardstock. So this does take a little bit of fiddling to get a good impression with the embossing folder, working out what was the best sandwich to make, etc. So I did it according to how it says, but because it's quite a shallow embossing folder, it didn't really make much of an impression. So then I added the shim. That you get with the Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine, and it was better but still not really a great impression. So then I added another shim myself of the piece of cardstock and ran that through, and that did okay. And so I thought, well, as I've already got the cardstock cut, I'll do a second piece and do another panel and perhaps use the embossing folder in a slightly different way. So first of all, one I decided to use the emboss side and the other one I decided to use the deboss side. So I started with the emboss side and I decided to just pull out my little blending tool that has got some white craft ink on it. Now I didn't re-ink it because there was already quite a bit of ink on there, but I will admit it did not come out as obvious as I wanted, but I sort of fixed that by the end and I'm quite happy with how that eventually looks. Now the other one, I took some darker pink ink and my brayer and decided to brayer over. It wasn't coming out quite as dark as I wanted though, so I do end up switching the ink up and going with, I think it's Riding Hood red ink, and that gave it a much better look. Now my brayer isn't brilliant. I think if you had a better brayer than mine then you'd be great, but mine's covered in paint, so it's got quite a bit of texture to it, so it does make it sort of a weird texture. So what I did was just smooth that out just slightly by adding some sprays of water and then drying it with my heat tool. And for those who've been watching my videos for a while will be going, she's got a new heat tool. I have got a new heat tool, and the reason I had to get a new heat tool is because my other one completely broke and wouldn't switch on again. So I've bought the WOW one that's got a 2-speed setting. To be honest, I've not really used it on anything other than the main speed, so I'm not quite sure why it has a 2-speed setting. Probably for things that you want to do a slower mount on, but that's not really me. So I trimmed it down, then added it to the other panel. Again, this is quite cheap, flimsy cardstock, so having 2 layers is a good idea anyway, but also that gave it a little frame of the lighter pink around the outside. Did the same with the other one. Now the other one I decided I actually wanted to add it to some gold cardstock. So this is the foiled cardstock from Kingston Crafts in the sort of the yellowy gold colour. I think it's beautiful, this cardstock, really beautiful. And I enjoyed popping a really fine trim around that. Now, if I'd have been sensible, I'd have die cut everything first and I'd have die cut panels, you know, with those sort of layering dies that you get. So instead I do quite a bit of fiddling around just to try and get the layers so that there's an equal sort of frame around. I don't do a brilliant job, but it's a reasonable job. But there is quite a lot of fiddling, as you can see. I go around literally getting rid of tiny, tiny little bits of trim. Right, next I need to decide on a sentiment. I could have stamped sentiment, etc., but I decided no, I was going to use these ones that were printed in the magazine kit. This one says happy birthday on it twice, and it's got like a flag at the other end, it's a banner at the other end of it. So it takes a bit of trimming to get it straight, but I do that and then decide, no, that's going to need something underneath. So again, I'm going into that mirrored cardstock pile that I've got, and I've got a pink colour scrap that's just perfect in terms of length, and then I can trim it down, and then I just trim my little banner end at the other end. So perfect for that. And then I think, right, I need something to soften it. So I went and grabbed a little bit of like this gold thread that I just got on my desk already. It was obviously cut for another project and not used, so it's just sitting there waiting to be used, and I thought, perfect. I did use my red line tape in order to stick that down, just because I wanted to make sure it was very secure, especially because it was sort of like sticking over that bit of texture from the embossing folder. And then I've decided I was going to make a 5x7 card, so I didn't quite like it as it was, and I thought, ooh, maybe I just pop a bit of pattern paper behind it. So this is one of the papers that's in that magazine kit. Perfect, giving it a nice sort of frame. It's a slight, so the designs that they've got, it tends to be one with a heavy pattern and one with a more subtle pattern like this. That's on the other side. So this is one of the more subtle patterns, but I think that works quite well. Right, back to this one. This one I decided was fine just directly onto the white, and then I'm umming and ahhing about the sentiment, and I decided to go for this one that says thank you. So a little bit of fussy cutting these sort of shapes that are a bit different. I'm not brilliant at fussy cutting, as in I don't always get curves done very well, but it went reasonably well. And it was enough for me to go, yeah, I'm happy with that. I don't need to go in for a second cut round because that's usually what happens. But I decided it needed that bit of separation, especially with the gold framing panel, that's sort of the matte layer. I thought it needed a bit more gold bringing into it. So I grabbed these Sizzix dies that were just towards the top of my little die box and therefore perfect. And there's this circle, and then there is a banner, and I cut that as well. Both from that gold mirrored cardstock, like foiled cardstock, and I just added a little bit of the tape runner behind, and that sort of like built me a little cluster, I suppose. Again, some of that twine, that sort of gold thready twine stuff, again, I just created a little bundle that would peek out the outside of this. And again, using the red line tape because of the texture, it just helps to make sure it keeps it in place, and I know it's going to be secure on the card. Okay, and then I stuck it down. Oh yeah, my ATG just decides that it wants to unravel and ravel up again. That's not the right word, is it? Unravel and then tangle, that's probably the better word. I used some of those Spellbinders little gold gems. They're sort of like reasonably raised little dots, but I thought that went with all the gold thread and the gold foil card. And then I wasn't 100% sure about that one with the white ink on the embossing. So I thought I'd start with my Wink of Stella for the hummingbird and add that in, which adds like a clear layer of shimmer. It looks like it's gone dark, but that's just because it's wet at that point, but it will dry so that it's not quite as dark. But that then gave me the idea of actually, I want to define those flowers and the hummingbird and stuff and the texture of it a little bit more. So I'm just using a bit of Melon Mambo pink ink and some water in order to just define those shapes a little bit more. Now, again, this looks darker as it's going on than it ends up. It is more subtle in the final card. It's just it looks darker as it is drying, but just that little bit of pigment in the water is just going to give that a little bit more depth, and I was much happier after I'd done this that there was enough definition. I'm not entirely sure if probably what I need to do is buy myself one of those maybe like a Ranger brayer or something, one where it's a very solid brayer that would allow me to lightly add ink onto a raised surface. But I also am not 100% sure that there's enough definition in that embossing folder to do that. So I don't know. I really like the cards I made. I hope you do too. I think they're quite pretty. They're bright. They're cheery. Obviously that embossing folder is a beautiful design. For me, just I wish it was that little bit deeper. I particularly like this with the sort of like the ink adding to the layer that's not debossed, if you know what I mean. Right, stop myself from waffling now. It's the end of the video, so please do like and subscribe if you want to see more. Obviously, this is part of a series, so there will be more videos to come. Until next time, though, bye-bye.